Yes. Are we good? All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you, first and foremost, for joining this session. I know you didn't have to. In this 45-minute session, we'll talk about the evolution of OT monitoring, as well as some of the different tactics and strategies that we use. I work for a company called Nozomi Networks, and we'll talk a bit about that. So this is my fourth time speaking here, so thank you also, Security Week, for having me back. It's always a pleasure, and it's one of my favorite events. So we'll start off with the history. So as you guys know, and you've probably been hearing this whole time, and you will hear for the rest of the week, of how OT networks were always created without security in mind. Sorry about that. And that as the industry evolved and things like convergence, a word that I really don't like to use, but we have to say it, we also needed to adapt our strategies to make sure that we're protecting systems that are still in place that are older than all of us, right? So with that, passive only at one point was a solution, and just in the last 5 years, we've seen that evolve as folks are starting to use active components, agents, cloud technologies. So passive is a good place to start, but it's really not enough. So who the heck is this guy up here talking? So like I said, I worked for Nozomi for the last 5.5 years, doing a lot of different integrations. Here I'm out at an oil and gas plant in Seattle, here with a customer in Malaysia doing a proof of concept and the phase one of a rollout. So I've been very fortunate to be in this position and to be able to help lots of different folks in lots of different industries. Prior to Nozomi, I was at another company called Darktrace, one of their earlier employees on the IT side. And then before that, I worked at an energy company called Exelon, where I was in their SOC doing incident response, network forensics, network security monitoring, and a little bit of threat intelligence. So back then, we were using Industrial Defender and some tools that kind of laid the foundation for what we use today. And Industrial Defender is also here and still around, and a great tool, right? So these are some of the different verticals that I've been fortunate to work with. So chemicals, manufacturing, automotive, airports, water, transportation, smart cities, logistics, food and retail, and building automation. And the cool thing is that despite how different these are, in terms of the systems and protecting them, and a lot of the ways they're deployed, they're more or less the same. So let's go to the next one. So I'm sure you've seen this diagram in some form or fashion at some point, probably already at this conference. You probably will see it a couple times as well. But just into what we are now, this age of digitalization, which is kind of the fourth industrial revolution. We have, I don't know why this keeps doing that. You hear things about IIoT and Industry 4.0. So basically, even across some of the different customers, prospects, POCs I've worked with, like I said, at some point, some of these older systems were given an IP address. And being on the vendor side, we're tasked with somehow providing a level of comfort and security for these devices. And as, like I said, more things come online, things become obsolete, end of sale, end of support, upgraded, and forced to be online, so does our strategy in how we go about protecting these systems. So with this, as you know, with OT, it's kind of the opposite of the CIA triad. So availability, is always the most important thing. Uptime, keeping things operational. And, after Stuxnet, which everyone knows about, people became more awake. And as different things are discovered and happen every year, every week almost, the attention from the top down just continues to be increased. So with that came a need for change. So the way we monitor OT systems has to also change. So when I started with Nozomi, which was around 5.5 years ago, the company had already been around for about 4 years before that. The ideal scenario that we had and kind of our who we are was to be passive, non-intrusive by design, because 5.5 years ago, if you spoke to anyone in the OT field about anything that wasn't passive, you were shown the door, right? So additionally, that's how things started. But as we saw a demand and a need and a want from our customers that said, passive is great. What can you do next? How much more can you give us? Maybe partially active. Maybe we don't want an agent, but maybe you can run a query to get firmware or serial number from some of these devices. And even that continued to evolve. And we'll talk about, how it went from passive to querying to cloud data analytics and now agents. And all of those are just, like I said, being converged. So from that, 2018, passive detection was pretty much the standard for OT monitoring tools, span ports, network taps, PCAPs, analysis that way. And it's still the primary source of OT monitoring and detection capabilities today. But like I said, there was a demand and a need and a want for more of that. And originally, even within Nozomi's, our founders were hesitant to even consider that, because we liked the idea that we were passive only, completely non-intrusive. That wasn't a space where we really wanted to get into. But just like everything else in our lives around technology changes, so should our monitoring strategies. And then in 2020, as we began to grow as a company and saw more customers with larger scale deployments, we're talking about monitoring hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of endpoints, that can get a little annoying to have to monitor all in-house when you're thinking of centralized single pane of glass view, managing physical equipment to keep up with all the big data flows and do analytics on top of that. So another push came for us to adapt cloud strategies and SaaS models. And now what we're seeing in 2023 and beyond are people are becoming more adaptive to having agents, or what we call like an OT EDR on certain systems, to get more real-time information consistent with what we typically would have only seen on the IT side in the past. So what we have is called an ARC agent, and this would be installed directly on a Linux, Windows, Mac OS device. And typically speaking in the past, so if we go over here, traditionally this method on the left was the passive only approach, right? So you would have a switch feeding data to a sensor. You could have multiple sensors going to an on-prem central management. And you could also have smaller probes that get data in that sense. But with the agent piece, it gives you the option to bypass all of that. So when you think of what traditionally it would take to secure your OT environment, it involves, one, having the infrastructure in place. So a switch that's managed or even capable of doing port mirroring, VLAN mirroring, the cabling, the proper placement of the devices, the proper infrastructure of deciding these are the systems that I want to monitor. Whereas now you can just install an agent on a device and bypass all of that extra effort as well. So it's, like I said, this is fairly new, at least within the Nozomi, and this was the first time in the industry where we had seen like an OT EDR. You know, obviously there's plenty of EDRs before that, but the one that we developed is more specific to OT systems, and we'll look at that in depth in a little demo later on. So what makes it unique? So you get continuous monitoring. So in the past, you know, with the Spanport, it's getting almost real-time collection of your data, copying that traffic, and sending it to whatever you're using to do your analysis. You get the same level of visibility with an agent. You also get the monitoring of the assets, which is the inventory piece, which is kind of standard for any OT monitoring tool. But what's also unique is now Sigma rules, which are open source, kind of Yara, Snort-like, which are looking at your process data, privilege escalation, DLL, side loading attempts, which we were not able to get, or anyone really, in the sort of just a passive-only approach. So now, you know, rather than just saying there's unusual activity between these two devices through this protocol, this network traffic, it's actually saying, you know, this host has unusual activity because they ran a PowerShell script, or because this user was logged in outside of when we've seen it before. So it gives you another level of visibility that we hadn't seen in the OT space. And like I said, giving you that user activity correlation piece. And then last but not least, the USB monitoring, which I have a short video to show what that would look like as well.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Does it use any AI, machine learning?
Yes. Yep. So the question was, is it using any AI machine learning features? And the answer is yes. So with the company, we still would represent ourselves as an IDS, intrusion detection system. So we detect intrusions through rules and signatures, so packet rules, Snort rules, Yara rules, STIX and TAXII, IOCs, as well as we use the National Vulnerability Database, ICS-US cert, to do CVE, CPE matching based on firmware, software, installed applications. And then on top of that, the AI neural network machine learning piece will look at different patterns of life from the device itself, from other devices like that device, from other similar network zoned or subnets of the device as well. And each one is on what we call a dynamic learning approach. So each individual node or unique source destination has its own learning module to it. That answer your question? Yep. So Sigma rules, like I said, some people still aren't really familiar with them, but basically just some examples of what it can give you. So usually when there's, in the past with network detection tools, if there's a threat or malware discovered, you see that after you see certain data in the packets. You see a file where a hash is matched, or you see attempts to an external IP or unusual behavior between network connections. But now, before it gets to that point, or if it's a device that may be offline at the time, you would still be able to get that information before it starts generating malicious network traffic. So, quick video here. I don't know if it's going to play on its own or if I have to, but this is just showing an example. It's about a minute long of network detection. There's no sound, so of course we had to. All right. So this is a USB drive being inserted. This could be a wireless mouse, wireless keyboard, not necessarily malicious. It's inserted. You get a few pieces of data here. So this is a screenshot from the Nozomi Guardian showing, hey, this device has been detected. Oh, I did not mean to do that, sorry. And it's saying, gives you some details on the device itself. Obviously the host that it's plugged into, and some overall details on what type of device it is. And then we always have a suggested solution cause, what might have happened, more for the analyst to say, is this something that should be a higher priority or not? So pretty straightforward, right? Second one, if a malicious device is plugged in. So in this case, looks like a keyboard, but doesn't act like one. So what happened on the host, this is what is happening on the Windows host where that keyboard is plugged in. And then this is imitating a SOC. If you have red alerts saying, hey, something's happening. And then in the Nozomi Guardian piece, what it would look like from an alerts point of view. So the first one, if we pause it, shows unusual power consumption. So you saw that was a keyboard or pretending to be one, but it's also trying to announce itself as a mouse. So we picked up that most wireless mouses would not, or mice, would not use that type of power consumption, right? And then if you remember the last one, it showed the vendor information on that USB, et cetera. This one doesn't have any, it's a malicious one. And then if we keep letting this play a little bit, it shows that there was some commands that were injected. So you saw the script that was run. All of this, like I said, without generating any network traffic. So before, when we didn't have agents and things like that, you would have to wait almost to step 2, phase 2, phase 3 of this type of attack before you actually get notified about it. So it's one of the pluses of the agent piece. Second part, and like I said, I'll show more about this after this. I'm really not a fan of PowerPoints. I'd rather just go right into the weeds. So we'll run through these really quick and get right into a demo. With the SaaS cloud piece, when you have a big deployment or even a smaller one, and you want to have a single pane of glass view, and a lot of times, one of the things, having worked for a few different vendors that have product made specifically for folks in a SOC, a lot of the feedback that I've heard from working at both places from the typical user is, where do I start? I log in and we've deployed 10 sensors across 5 sites. I'm a little overwhelmed with the data, the alerts. I don't know where to start. And what we've added into the tool is to give you that leg up, which we call Vantage IQ, which is, like I said, for the analyst. So it gives you, rather than you saying, where do I start? We're going to kind of push you and tell you where we think, based on the AI, the deep learning, and the insights, where we think you should draw your attention when you first log in. So in this, there's a couple here, it might be hard to read, but I'll show these in a real demo as well. But it tells you in terms of overall alerts, types of alerts, vulnerabilities, and even details on your sites as well. So let's say overnight you wanted to push updates to software updates for the Nozomi sensor, and 8 out of 10 of those went through. Maybe one of them didn't because a connection was broken, and it'll say, hey, this site isn't running the same versions as the other, or this site lost data. Maybe there was an outage and the switch reset itself and the span configurations were gone. Like, it would give you that information to tell you where to start, or even, we see some other activities performed by users that aren't admins, where we in the past only saw admins doing something specific. So other piece, these are just a use case or two. So an admin needs to know if the tools are placed properly or not. So literally right before this meeting, one of our customers came up to us and said, I want to make sure that what we have, I'm new to the project, but I'm owning this. I want to make sure what we have is placed properly. It'll give you details saying, hey, we see that certain sensors are getting a certain quality of data and other sensors aren't. So maybe we recommend connecting your sensors or reconfiguring or checking your span configuration because something's off between the quality of the data between these two sites. So it's a different piece. It's something that we haven't seen in the industry yet, but so far it's fairly new as well, but a lot of folks have been happy with it. So last but not least, before we go into demo, happy to connect with any of you and all of you if we're not already on LinkedIn, and thank you for coming by. But let me get a little demo up in here. Give me a second to switch out the displays. And for those of you who are online, thank you as well for dialing in. Sorry for the seizure everyone's getting right now. Okay. So, how are we on time? Okay, so what we have here is a live instance of Vantage. So, as you can see, logging in, the Vantage IQ piece, which we talked about, the different sensors, different views of the different alerts and activities that are occurring. But I wanted to first start with the ARC piece. So if you remember, ARC is that agent. So, we good?
Don't mind me.
Oh, okay.
Making sure I get it on my end.
Good? All right. So if you remember ARC, that's that lightweight OT EDR type agent. So what we are getting that looks different than a passive approach, right? So obviously things like the CPU load, RAM, disk space, a live view of that as it changes from a host. But one thing that we weren't able to get in the past are processes. So if you remember those Sigma rules, and it's going to be looking at the different processes themselves, the active ones, what they're doing, what active connections they have, the process IDs, the source and destination of these different connections, as well as installed applications and software. So on this workstation, we've got Notepad+, NPCap, Chrome, 7-Zip, etc., Firefox. And like I said, in the past, we weren't able to get that, a live view of it. So even when we started doing the querying active piece, it would just be, this is the information on that host at the time that you executed this query, rather than a continuous update of, this might be, you might have a low disk space, low RAM right now, but 10 minutes later, it could change. So this gives you the continuous piece of it and what we do with this information, right? So these are all the versions on the right side of what these applications have. We'll actually pull up any vulnerabilities based on that. And before, the vulnerability piece was more so on just the application itself and what it was running. But now think of browsers themselves and some of the different vulnerabilities they have. So let me add a column here to show this. So for example, this CVE here, right? This is specific to the version of Firefox that's on this particular workstation, right? So this was something that we weren't able to pull up before. And a lot of our customers haven't been able to find something that gives them this in addition to the other pieces that we have also. So let me see if there's anything else from the IQ piece. Oh, and then with deploying it, because one of the questions people get, is how lightweight is it? So deploying it to a host doesn't require a reboot or anything of that nature. You can do it manually with the file themselves and have it installed. Or even from here, we make it easier. So whichever, if let's say you want to do a manual deployment, you download it, you have the file there, or you can actually have it pushed through MDM or whatever you use across certain devices. And it gets really customizable, which I can show you. We have our booth and stuff where we can get more into the weeds if anyone wants to, but let's say, for example, 10 workstations share the same admin credentials. You want to push it to those. Do you need to go in and authenticate 10 times to them? No. So we have a way where you can get really down in the weeds and say, for these hosts, they go with this set of credentials, push it out at this time frame, or delete it as well. So it goes both ways. And then the next piece with Vantage IQ, like I said, which we talked about. So where this was birthed, we internally used to say, and this was before it was a thing, we wanted to, what can we ask our data, right? More like a chat GPT style, right? So rather than just having you sift through it, we added a piece into it called Insights and Answers. So within the answers piece, we have a couple preloaded questions. The goal in the future is for it to have, literally where you say, show me sites where the throughput was higher than usual over the weekend between 10 and 11:30 a.m. And it would spit back out that information. But, as you can see where we're heading, and if you were to click on, any of these, it would pull up that data, parse it, and then spit it back out. And this could be across, 1 to 10 to 20 sensors. It gives you graphs, details on the different systems themselves. And this can be presented different ways as well. So just to show you, if you're very into AI and deep learning, so are we. So also with that, there's a piece, and I don't have that here, it's called time series. But what that does is it compares, like I said, the data integrity and throughput and quality of the traffic across sensors. So, if even just data flows, if it's typically between this threshold of a throughput or it's a spike, hopefully you can say, well, during that spike, we were upgrading these systems and we didn't even expect you to catch that. And you can check it and say, this is okay, this isn't, et cetera. So, but let's see. So we have a little bit more time. I'll pause here for any questions. There's obviously a ton of stuff I can show. I've, in the past, have shown the nucleus of what Guardian is, how you would set it up, where you deploy it. But I know there's some familiar faces here that I've seen that probably don't want to hear the same thing. And I figured we could talk about new stuff. And last but not least, before we go on to questions, one thing people always ask is, well, what's next? Zomi's always thinking ahead and trying to beat the rush before and be more proactive rather than reactive. We do have plans in the next year to start attacking more wireless, so 802.11 cellular, Bluetooth. That's in the works. I can't say much about it. I wish I could show you what we have because we do have some really cool stuff on that as well. But we want to also get into that space and do basically the same type of things that we're able to do with OT, IT, IoT devices. So, questions? Yeah.
Does that work with all the different vendors for Ethernet communications and VoIP?
Yeah. So the question was, does that work with other Ethernet communications and VoIP? And when I'm assuming you say that, you just mean the tool?
The software?
Yeah.
Does it work with the different manufacturers, Exchange Network, Cisco?
Yeah. So we over the 10 years that we've been around, we've built a deep network of understanding different devices and protocols based on what we've seen. So I have a view here, and this view is standard. It's a network graph view that basically shows source destination of all your connections, the direction of it, and if you zoom in, it actually shows, the protocol that it's using. Give me a second here, I don't have a mouse. So you have Modbus, Ethernet IP, et cetera. And then how that works with the learning of it, from an Ethernet IP communication, these are the function codes that we've seen and what gets learned and unlearned. And then even if we go another level deeper, to the field process level, the I/O analog digital connections, we call them variables. We can even get down to that level to say, this PLC has X amount of I/O points, analog digital connections. What are we doing with that? We're looking at those to see if there's any deviations or anomalies there as well. So if you think of the different verticals, speeds of belts, fans, levels in tanks, batteries discharging, recharging, et cetera, they usually have a consistent cycle or pattern of life that people call it, right? So if that changes, we are documenting the minimum, the maximum, all the values in between. This is a Modbus function code 3. And even if it's what we call a cyclic flow, so meaning maybe the value doesn't change, but every X amount of seconds, milliseconds, there's some type of activity, right? So if that deviates, we would alert you on it. And the purpose of that is obviously to keep things operational and to give more like a predictive analysis, predictive maintenance piece, right? So maybe it's something that the human eye doesn't catch. Something's working as it seems, but it may be half a second slower than it should be, which could indicate a failure or something soon to fail or something that needs to be replaced. So, sorry, you're next.
Can you manually set those thresholds for the tag values?
Yeah, question was, can you manually set the thresholds? And the answer is yes. There's a configuration button here, and you can set, thresholds, how often you want it to check. If you want it to record all of those, the scale, the type of variable it is. So like I said, if it's power consumption or something in hertz, gigahertz, whatever. So
Yeah, just to be clear too, it's actively querying to those values, it's not seeing it on the wire.
so this is actually passive. Yeah.
Passive?
Yep.
Okay.
And so what we can also do, and this is where it gets tricky because with OT, there's so many protocols, right? So some, for example, Modbus, OPC, and like this OPC one up top is actually saying what it is, the pipe flow status, right? Different protocols in plain text will have different amounts of data, and then some protocols like an Ethernet IP implicit, if you don't have a project file, you don't get that. So we can actually take in project files to parse and decode whatever you define those as and show them with more specific tags as well. Yep. In the back. Yep.
For the ARC agent, what's the Windows OS requirements? 64-bit, 32-bit?
Yeah, so right now we support Windows 7 and upward. I know we're in the process of getting to XP. That I think that would be, I want to say early Q1 that should be supported. But we do support the 32 and 64-bit. Like, let me see. Yeah. So right now this is what we support. 386, AMD 64, and we have there's a full detailed separate guide manual on that. So if you want, stop by the booth and I'm happy to share that with you.
Do you guys have any software or code scanning capabilities currently?
So the question is, do we have software or code scanning capabilities? So the way that you're thinking, no. So we're not getting, at least today, no. Now when we do,
Like SBOM.
right, it's like SBOM. So no, and what we do have in terms of how we detect things is within, for example, or let me go here where it would show. From the threat intelligence pieces themselves, if you remembered, I mentioned that we do have the signature-based piece. You can see, for example, any of these, like in this case, there's 685 packet or snort-like rules. And if we open any of them, let's find one that is viewable. It'll show you exactly what it's looking for. So alert TCP, like I said, very snort-like, where it's looking for specific pieces in the packet, specific headers if we're talking files downloaded or viewed internally, but we're not scanning. Like I said, we started off passively, so we want to stay as less intrusive and as lightweight as possible, so we don't want to increase resources. We don't want to be accused or the factor of taking anything off the network. So we respect those in the space who are able to do that, and that's their specialty. So, but we are more, like I said, an IDS to detect scans and intrusions, right? So, any other questions? Okay, so there's, other pieces, like I said, I could show. I don't want to be salesy or anything, but if there's any specific questions or things that you guys see in the field that you'd like to be addressed, or that maybe you see, whether you use us or someone else, that you say, hey, maybe this would be really, productive if we had a tool that could also do this. This is, I'd say, a huge portion of the tool. It looks very different than when I started 5.5 years ago, and that's because of feedback from customers. So small things, big things, a lot of them come from the feedback that we get from the field. So if you guys have any input on the things you're struggling the most with from a monitoring standpoint, or what you'd like to see more or less of, feel free to let us know. So, all right, if there's no more questions, thank you guys. I'll give you 10 minutes back, and I appreciate everyone for coming by.